The rain started just as we turned onto Maple Avenue. It wasn't the gentle kind that makes you slow down and sigh at the sky. It came down in sheets, blurring the windshield, turning headlights into long, trembling streaks of white. My newborn daughter Ava was strapped into her car seat in the back, wrapped in the soft yellow blanket the nurses at St. Mary's Hospital had tucked around her only 3 days earlier. 3 days. That was how long I'd been a mother. I remember glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Her tiny mouth was open, her breath soft and rhythmic. She had my husband Daniel's nose. Daniel had died 6 months earlier in a construction accident. Ava would grow up knowing him only through photographs and stories. I was on my way to my mother's house. I hadn't planned to go, not really, but after the hospital discharged us, I panicked. My small apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too fragile. Every creak in the floor sounded like danger. Every shadow felt heavier. I needed help. And no matter how complicated things had always been between my mother and me, I believed that a grandmother would open her arms to her granddaughter. I was wrong. The truck ran the red light. 1 second I was blinking rain from my eyes, the next there was a scream of metal and a violent spin. The world flipped sideways, glass exploded. The car jerked, slammed, and then everything went still except for the sound of Ava crying. That cry saved me. I don't remember crawling out, I don't remember who pulled open the back door. I only remember shouting, my baby, over and over until someone placed her in my arms. An ambulance rushed us back to St. Mary's Hospital. I had a fractured wrist and bruised ribs. Ava, by some miracle, had only a small cut near her temple. The doctors kept repeating the word lucky. Lucky. Daniel wasn't lucky. I wasn't sure I believed in luck anymore. When they finished checking Ava, I asked the nurse to call my mother. My phone had shattered in the crash. She's the only family nearby, I said. The nurse nodded and stepped out. My mother arrived an hour later. She walked into the hospital room wearing her beige trench coat, her hair perfectly styled as if she were heading to lunch with her friends instead of meeting her injured daughter and newborn granddaughter. She didn't hug me. Her eyes went straight to the bassinet. So this is her, she said flatly. This is Ava, I whispered. My mother stared at the tiny bundle, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looks like him. I knew what she meant. Daniel. My mother had never approved of him. She thought he was beneath us because he worked with his hands, because he didn't have a degree, because he didn't come from what she called the right kind of family. She's your granddaughter, I said quietly. My mother folded her arms, and you expect me to do what exactly? I need help, Mom, just for a little while. The apartment, I can't manage alone. I thought maybe we could stay with you, or you could stay with me. Silence filled the room. Then she said the words that would echo in my head for weeks. I will not raise his child. The air left my lungs. I'm not asking you to raise her, I said, my voice shaking. I'm asking you to help your daughter. She's a reminder, my mother replied coolly, of your mistake. Daniel was not a mistake. But I was too exhausted to argue. I can't bring that baby into my house, she continued. The neighbors would talk, everyone knows how Daniel died. It was tragic, yes, but it was messy. Messy. As if grief were a stain on her carpet. So that's it, I whispered. My mother adjusted her coat. You chose your path, now you live with it. And she walked out. I stared at the doorway long after she was gone. The nurse who had called her stood awkwardly near the wall. She looked at me with pity. Do you have anyone else? She asked gently. There was only one name left. My grandfather, I said. Grandpa lived 2 hours away in a small town where time seemed to move slower. He was my father's father. My father had died when I was 16, but Grandpa had remained steady in my life, quiet, dependable, the kind of man who showed love through actions instead of words. I hadn't called him yet because he was 82, I didn't want to burden him. But I was out of options. The nurse handed me her phone. My hands trembled as I dialed. He answered on the third ring. Hello. Grandpa, I choked. There was a pause. Sweetheart, what's wrong? I told him everything, the accident, Mom's refusal, the fear that wrapped around my chest like barbed wire. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was silence on the line. Then he said, calm and steady, give me the hospital address. Grandpa, it's raining, it's late, you don't have to. I said, he repeated gently, give me the address. 2 hours later, he walked into my room wearing his old denim jacket and carrying a thermos. He looked smaller than I remembered, but his eyes were fierce. He came straight to me and kissed my forehead. Then he looked at Ava. Well, he said softly, there she is. He didn't hesitate, he didn't frown, he didn't mention Daniel. He simply reached down and lifted her carefully into his arms. Hello, little one, he whispered, you've caused quite a stir already. I started crying again, but this time it felt different, less sharp, less lonely. She's beautiful, he said firmly, as if stating a fact no one could argue. The next morning while I slept, Grandpa made a phone call. I didn't know about it until later. What I did know was that by noon, my mother stormed into the hospital room again. Her cheeks were flushed, her composure was cracked. How dare you, she snapped the moment she saw Grandpa. He stood up slowly from the chair beside my bed. How dare I what? He asked calmly. You had no right to call the board, she hissed. Board? Grandpa glanced at me. Maybe you should explain, he said to my mother. I stared between them, confused. My mother was the director of a local charity foundation, one built largely on donations from my grandfather's business decades earlier, a fact she rarely acknowledged publicly. You threaten my position, she accused him. I informed them, Grandpa corrected gently, that if they continued to employ someone who publicly shuns her own injured daughter and newborn granddaughter, I would be withdrawing my family's endowment. My mouth fell open. You wouldn't, my mother said, but her voice wavered. I already did, he replied. The room felt electric. You're blackmailing me, she spat. No, he said quietly, I'm reminding you of your values, or at least the values you claim to have. My mother looked at Ave. Really looked at her this time. She'll ruin everything, she whispered. Grandpa's jaw tightened. No, your pride will. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in my mother's eyes. I built my reputation carefully, she said more softly. People expect a certain image. And what image is that? Grandpa asked. One where compassion only applies to strangers. Her shoulders sagged. I watched her walls crack. She stepped closer to the bassinet. Ava stirred, her tiny fingers curling. My mother hesitated before reaching out. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling slightly, then finally brushed Ava's cheek. Ava blinked up at her. Something shifted. She has my mother's eyes, my mom murmured. Grandpa nodded. Yes, she does. A tear slipped down my mother's cheek. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her cry. I was afraid, she admitted quietly. After Daniel died, I thought if I pushed this away, I wouldn't have to feel it. Her voice broke. I already lost you once, she whispered to me, when you chose him over everything I wanted for you. I didn't choose him over you, I said softly. I chose love. Grandpa placed a hand on her shoulder. And here it is again, he said, nodding toward Ava. Love doesn't disappear just because we don't approve of its form. My mother took a shaky breath. Then she did something I never expected. She lifted Ava into her arms. Not stiffly. Not reluctantly. Carefully, gently. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Neither do I said. Grandpa chuckled. That makes 3 of us. We all laughed then, fragile and uncertain. Later that week, I moved into my mother's house, not because she feared losing her position, but because she asked me to. The foundation board never made a public issue of anything. Grandpa quietly reinstated his endowment after my mother publicly announced a new family support initiative at the charity. But the real change happened at home. My mother woke for 3 a.m. feedings. She learned how to change diapers without wrinkling her nose. She stopped referring to Daniel as a mistake and started telling Ava stories about her father's courage and kindness. One evening, I found her rocking Ava in the nursery. I almost missed this, she whispered when she saw me, out of pride. I leaned against the doorframe. Grandpa saved us, I said. She smiled faintly. Yes, but he only made a call, the rest was a choice. Grandpa visited every Sunday. He never mentioned the threat again. But sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, I'd catch him watching the 3 of us, my mother, my daughter, and me, with quiet satisfaction. Ava is 3 now. She runs through my mother's garden, chasing butterflies while my mom calls out warnings about muddy shoes. Daniel's photo hangs in the hallway, not hidden, not avoided. And Grandpa. He still claims he didn't do anything special. It was just a phone call, he says. But it was. It was a reminder. That family isn't about image. It's about showing up. Even in the rain. Even after the crash. Especially when someone is too small to ask for help. And every time I see my mother kiss Ava goodnight, I know that one call didn't just change everything. It gave us back each other.